So we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's our last monthly meeting for the season, so that's exciting and kind of crazy to think about that the 2024-2025 season has already passed us by. We have a great lineup for you this fall and next winter too as well. So very excited about all of that, and thank you sincerely to everybody who joined us on Saturday for our Memorial Day service. It was great to see most, if not all of you there. It was a great turnout. We had 50 people who showed up at Rural Cemetery, so it was pretty amazing to have that many folks who showed up, and it was great to see all of you there too as well. Just by way of announcements, we have on Tuesday, June 24th. Okay, I always look at Peter when I say a date because he's on top of those things. June 24th at 6 p.m. we'll have our annual picnic here at the Low Tide Yacht Club. So we will be doing our regular annual business meeting. So if anybody would like to be on the board, or anybody would like to be president of the New Bedford Civil War Roundtable.
Mark Mello for president.
Stop it, Jack.
4 years.
I'm gonna kick both of you out of here. No. If anybody is interested in a leadership position, I'll frame it that way, please see me after the meeting, and we'd be happy to welcome you to the board or as the new president of the New Bedford Civil War Roundtable. But our meeting will be on June 24th, 6 p.m. We are doing Riccardi's again, so we'll call it a Garibaldi Guard, if you will, feast. So that went well last year, we thought, so we're doing the Italian again. We will be lucky enough to have our book award winners, at least 2 of them, who have already committed to coming. So that'll be great to see them. We'll be able to give them their symbolic checks that they won, and we'll go over who the award winners were this year too at the June picnic. So put that on your calendar. Another hold the date, June 21st. It's a Saturday. I have the day off. It's a very rare occasion where I have a Saturday off. I would like to put that on the calendar as a good day to do phase 1 of the Rural Cemetery project, which would be recording all of the gravestones, measuring the gravestones, and taking detailed accounts of what we can read on the gravestones, all of that, any damage already to the gravestones. First step, as always, as we heard last month in the presentation, document. So the more hands certainly that participate in that, the easier it will be. So June 21st, Saturday, and we'll shoot for like a 9 a.m. start time. Hopefully it won't be horribly hot. If we get enough folks, we can hopefully bang it out in a few hours before it starts to get into the heat of the day. So just put that on your calendars. Emails will follow too as well with more information about that. Before I jump into the presentation tonight, we are lucky enough to have Rod Frazier, member of the Sons of Union.
What time on that Saturday, Mark?
9 a.m.
9 a.m.?
9 a.m. And we'll see how long it takes. Hopefully we're done by 11, 12 o'clock. I have a party, a graduation party for my nieces to be at 1 o'clock. So from hell or high water, we have to be out of there before then. But besides that, we should be able to get that done if we get enough folks on a few hours in the morning. We are lucky enough today, though, to be joined by Rod Frazier. Rod is a Sons of Union Veterans president?
Commander for the Massachusetts. Yeah.
So Rod's just going to speak real briefly about his organization, the work that they do. Thank you to Dawn for making that connection, and then we'll hop into tonight's presentation. So, Rod.
Well, thank you all for having me. I very much appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Mark. So I'm Rod Frazier. I'm the commander of the Massachusetts Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. I'm also a national elected officer. I serve on the National Council of Administration. I'm also a dual member, actually belong to the in Massachusetts. I was living in Boston until recently. I belonged to the Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, Camp Number 54 in Boston, and I also belong to the Governor Elisha Dyer, Camp 7 in Rhode Island, now they moved to Rhode Island. interesting. Governor Dyer is like my sixth cousin or something like that. You know, so a little bit about ourselves. So we're made up of both Civil War descendants and non-Civil War descendants. So you don't have to be a descendant of a Civil War veteran to be a member. So I'm a descendant of a Civil War member. My great-great-great-grandfather, his name was George McCluskey, and he was actually a British citizen. He was born in Canada. He was an orphan, and he joined the 1st Maine Cavalry when he was 17 years old. He lied about his age. He used a pseudonym. Why? I'm not really sure. I don't think anyone really figured out who he was back then at that time. But so he was in the 1st Maine Cavalry, and he was captured by the Confederates at the Battle of St. Mary's Church, and he spent the remainder of the year as a guest of theirs at Camp Sumter in Andersonville, Georgia, where he almost died. And luckily, he was then moved from there to the camp in Millen, Georgia. And he was so sick, they moved him to a hospital in Columbus, and the Union Army liberated the city of Columbus, or took over the city of Columbus, and then he was taken back to a Union hospital. And then by the time he got well, the war was pretty much ended. So that was his story, and that's who I honor with my membership. So I left on the back there our little, I call it recruitment pamphlet, tells a little bit about us. And I also left another pamphlet, and this is about Susie Taylor. So Susie Taylor, she was born a slave in Georgia, and she ran away to the Union lines during the Battle of Fort Pulaski, and she wound up being joining the 33rd U.S. Colored Troop, which originally was the 2nd North Carolina Volunteers, right? She joined the 33rd U.S. Colored Troops. She could read and write. She used to teach the black soldiers how to read and write. She met her husband, who was a sergeant there. After the war, he died. She wound up living in Boston, and she was credited as being the first black U.S. Army nurse. She served during the Civil War, and she was living in Boston when she passed away, and she was in an unmarked grave. And the Sons of Union Veterans, if you see on here, we put up the money, we put a monument to her. It tells about her life and everything in the pamphlet. It was originally, we did this for the dedication of the monument. People kept asking us for them, so we just keep reprinting them and giving them out. So very interesting lady, Susie Taylor. So those are on the back. New Bedford's had a long Civil War history. Not only did they send a lot of their sons to the Civil War, but the Grand Army of the Republic had a number of posts here in New Bedford. So William Logan Rodman, post number 1 in the state of Massachusetts, was in New Bedford, and among its members was William H. Carney, right? So he was a member of post 1 in New Bedford. Also, the Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, post number 146, started here in New Bedford. It only had 13 members. It lasted a short time, and then it folded in. The R.A. Pierce, post number 180, had 335 members here in New Bedford. The Rodman post number 1, had 530 members. There was also there's really 2 Sons of Union Veterans camps here. There was the John A. Hawes camp number 35. That had 349 members at its peak. And then the John A. Clifford camp was camp number 130 and had 161 members. And then for some reason, they lost their charter. I'm not sure why, but then they reconstituted a few years later, and they had 250 members, and they were the same name, John A. Clifford Camp, camp number 150. So that's a little bit about the history that we have here in New Bedford. Now, I read your newsletter, and I saw what the talk was about. Those pamphlets are on the back table if anyone wants to take one. Also, I left your card. This is our national YouTube channel for the Sons, and there's a QR code on the back, so if you scan it, it takes you right there. You can see some of the videos of some of the stuff we do. The Sons of Union Veterans, we do this work all the time. So I wanted to talk to that for a second because I know that was on the docket. We buy every year a lot of the D2 biological cleaner that you use to clean the headstones, and we buy it, we make it available to the camps, our camps, for free. So any of our camps are doing this kind of work, they can go to our Graves registration officer and say, I need 6 gallons of this stuff, and it's kind of a first come, first serve. We give it out, and once it's gone, it's gone. We've never had a camp not get it, because we buy quite a bit of it. We also provide these free to our camps. These are the grave markers that have the flag holding grave markers. So this is the Veterans 1861, 1865 marker. And we also have a GAR marker, which I don't have in my car right now, so I can't show you. I had these in my car from over the weekend. We did a ceremony and I used this here. So that's the kind of stuff that we do to help our camps be able to do this work. And for you guys, I don't know exactly what we're gonna do here, but we have a tripod. So if you have to lift a stone back in its position or something like that, if you contact us, we can maybe send a couple brothers over who know how to use a tripod and help you out when you do that. So feel free to contact me and I'll put you in touch with anybody. Anybody here, other than the good judge, a descendant of a Civil War soldier? Anyone? All right, a couple guys. All right, that's good. Anybody just don't, how many people just don't know? They just don't know.
Does an uncle count?
Uncles count. You can be a member of the Sons of Union Veterans.
Well, that's not a direct descendant, but.
I know I said direct descendant, but it's descendant, right? So uncles count, right? Grandfathers, uncles count. Actually, an uncle, my great grandmother's oldest brother served also, and he kind of went unscathed through the whole war. And then once the war was over, he almost lost his arm in an accident. Believe it or not, it's like a weird thing. To go serve all 4 years in all this combat, and then almost get killed in a freak accident when the war's been over for 3 months. Yeah, you can be a nephew. But we certainly would encourage you guys to join. If you have enough people who are interested, we'd love to start a camp here in New Bedford, and we'll do whatever we can to help you out. One of the things we find is a lot of people just don't know, for whatever reason, that their ancestor fought in the Civil War. I had a friend of mine, and he had a photo on Facebook, and my friend is half African American and half Native American Indian. This gentleman was wearing a hat and a suit, and he was sitting down, and there was two women, obviously the wife and the daughter in the photo with him. I said to my friend, "Hey, who's that picture on your Facebook page?" He goes, "Oh, it's my great-grandfather." Told me the guy's name. I said, "Oh, he's a Civil War veteran." He goes, "Oh, geez, I don't know." Well, no, it wasn't a question, Darryl. It was a statement. He's a Civil War veteran. He goes, "How do you know?" He's got a Grand Army of the Republic badge on his jacket, right? So he didn't even know, right? His great-grandfather served in the Civil War. So after that, he got very interested in it. So a lot of people just don't know. So that's all. I don't want to take up any of your time. It's your meeting, but any questions? Sir?
Do you have any way of replacing stones?
So if the stone is damaged like this, yeah, so, one last thing, because I didn't think about it until you started talking, Mark, right? When you do the cemetery, please write down, if you're gonna write down all the information from these stones, if you can get it to me, the Sons of Union Veterans has a nationwide Union soldier burial database. And we put every soldier that we find into the database. Now, they might already be in there, I don't know, but the first thing we do is check the name, is it in the database? If not, we add it. And we actually get a lot of historians and people use that database for research. So if you give me those names, I'll put them in the database. Now, I'm not sure at what point the Veterans Administration will say the stone's damaged enough to be replaced. We replaced one for a sailor in Boston. It looked like a car hit it. It was in multiple pieces. We took photos of it, and the VA sent a new stone to the cemetery. Yeah, usually, if you have anybody who's a veteran, doesn't have to be a Civil War veteran, any veteran, you can prove his documented service. If they don't have a stone, the Veterans Administration will provide one free of charge. Okay? So you go on the website, if you're interested in that, I can show you how to do that. It's pretty easy. I'm doing one right now for a Civil War soldier in Rhode Island. So you go in there, you put all the information in. Matter of fact, I just did it for my grandfather. My grandfather passed away. He was 102 years old. He was a World War II vet. And he wanted a VA marker, so I just did the paperwork the other day. It was pretty simple. But they will replace broken, damaged stones, but I don't know what they consider damage. So, it's up to the Veterans Administration. This one was clearly damaged, it was like 6 or 7 pieces. There's no way you could put it up. This one here, if it's laying down, I've seen a couple different ways where people have put it back up in cement and things like that so they keep the original stone. Did that answer your question, sir? Yeah.
But it also has to be legible, obviously, too. Be able to read what's on the stone.
Correct.
To send in, or to replace it.
On the replacement, does not, if you cannot read it at all, that's grounds for replacement.
And you put up a blank stone? If you can't read the stone?
Well, you gotta know, they won't give you a blank stone, you gotta know the guy's name, it comes all etched in and all, right? So when you have to have all the information when you send it to the VA, and, because you have to prove the person was a veteran, so you have to have something. I've used, for Civil War guys, I've used pension records. You know, it's got a pension or something, whatever you can find. If you got an enlistment or if you got a discharge or a pension record, they might actually accept copies of the State Adjutant General's report that shows he was discharged honorably at the end of the war. Things like that. You have to have some kind of a proof that the person served and was a veteran, and they'll provide the stone. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ross. I
Hey.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
And thank you, Don, for making the connection with Rod. Certainly, I think that this can be the beginning of a great partnership together, working here in New Bedford especially. So tonight's presentation, normally I would introduce the speaker. It's me, so I won't introduce myself. But the reason why I wanted to do this on the heels of both our presentation last month, where we met with the Middleborough Friends Cemeteries Commission Association, I forget the formal title, and they talked about the work that they've done, along with, right on the heels of our rural cemetery Memorial Day service, is because a lot of people, and I think it's a fair question sometimes that people will ask, why should we care, right? Why should we take the time out of our busy lives to clean up old stones, literally, right? They're stones. Why should we do that? And so tonight, hopefully by featuring 3 stories of people who are actually buried there in that section of rural cemetery, we can highlight what the importance is of why should we undergo this work. What is the value of doing this type of thing? Now, normally I would be the person to sit and click the slides. Can't click my mouse. Do I have any volunteers to click through slides for me? Jack? Yeah, just if someone wants to sit there and just literally hit the arrows. We're putting Rod to work. His first visit and he's going to work. Thank you, sir. So you can hit the, Please.
I should have known that because Navy stands for never again volunteer yourself, right? I should have known that for 20 years not to do it.
Very good. So when we first underwent this, Peter actually was very nice to give me, Peter's got a whole set of records that were formerly the New Bedford City records that were on the floor in the water department, I think is the old story, that were all kind of scattered with all the veterans from the Civil War, from New Bedford, with all their information on them. Now, they're safe. Thank you, Peter, for that. But there's also a great binder that was compiled of the honor roll, the New Bedford honor roll, individuals who died during the Civil War from New Bedford. It was originally compiled by a gentleman who worked for the city in the 1860s, the last name of Congdon, right? That's a good old New Bedford name. He compiled a list of all of the individuals who were killed in action during the war from New Bedford. It's an amazing list. I have the binder if anybody wants to borrow it, to take a look at it. It's an amazing resource. And there are several people listed as buried in rural cemetery. Now, when I first got the binder, I'm like, this is great, right? This just did all of my research for me, right? Very easy. All this has been compiled. All the information I want, who they were, what did they do before the war, where are they buried, all of that. As I started to look at each one of these listings, though, for some of these individuals, just give you a taste of some of the people who are actually buried at rural cemetery from New Bedford who were killed during the war. Ezra D. Chase was in the 20th Regiment, Massachusetts Regiment, Company G, died on June 9, 1864 in the Battle of Cold Harbor. He was a farmer before the war, taken as a prisoner during Ball's Bluff, wounded at Antietam and Fredericksburg, and then ultimately killed at the Battle of Cold Harbor. So he had a rough go at it during the Civil War. Unfortunately, though, he's killed in action on June 9, 1864. Corporal Stephen Crepo of the 58 died of a gunshot wound near Spotsylvania Courthouse. Nathaniel Ottewell, acting master's mate on the steamer Cambridge, died at sea off of Cape Lookout. James P. Shepard of the 18th Mass died in a hospital just west of Philadelphia as a result of wounds he suffered at the Battle of Gettysburg. I mentioned him at the very beginning of our Memorial Day service on Saturday. William Tripp of the 23rd Regiment, killed at during the Siege of Petersburg in the trenches. And Sergeant Samuel Watson, 58th Regiment, died December 11th, 1864 at home when on furlough after exposure that he suffered from at Danville Prison. So these are just some of the examples of individuals who actually buried at Rural Cemetery who died during the war. There was a problem, though, that I ran into. If someone died during the war, if a soldier was killed during the war, where were they usually buried?
Right then.
They were usually buried on the battlefield. They're very close to the battlefield. That's why our national cemeteries are filled with all of these soldiers who were killed during action during the war. The plot that we hold our Memorial Day service in is first burial, and I found the newspaper article, the first burial is in 1870. Do we think any of these individuals are actually buried in that plot there? No. I'll give you the answer, they're not. So they're not. All of them are buried in their family plots. Most of them, some of them, I did a little bit of digging, some of them literally, in the case of Shepard, he died in an army hospital. That information, a letter got brought home. The family actually paid to have him brought back home. When the family paid to have him brought back home, the family buried him in the plot, the family plot at Rural Cemetery. So once I uncovered this fact, all of these individuals are all buried in their family plots. None of them are buried in the veterans plot, because all of them were killed prior to 1870, and all of them had been moved to New Bedford prior to the institution of that veterans plot in the cemetery. So all of them are buried in their family plots. So all I discovered is we have a lot more work to do because there's a lot of graves. I've actually found a few of them, but they are spread across Rural Cemetery because each of them is in their own individual family plot. The next slide, please. So a little bit of history on Rural Cemetery. Rural Cemetery in New Bedford opens in 1837. I usually am a person who hates words on a slide, so forgive me because I have a lot of words on slides here tonight. But opened 1837. That cemetery is approximately 100 acres in size. It's a massive cemetery. And when you drive through it, when I drive through it every Memorial Day, you get a good feel for that. It's the 5th rural cemetery in the country. That is a very particular type of cemetery born out of that era of the early 19th century. Mount Auburn Cemetery up in Boston is the first example of this. This is on this very beginnings, at the beginning of the 19th century, the idea that cemeteries would be more than just a place to bury people, right? They could be a place for recreation. They could be a place for people to commune with their fallen ancestors, the ancestors who have gone before them. You plant nice trees, you plant gardens, right? There's nice paths to walk down. People could literally go and would go and have picnics in cemeteries at that time. So it's almost this idea of a cemetery becoming not just a place to bury the dead, but also a place for people to go and recreate, a place that becomes a quasi-park, if you will. New Bedford is the 5th example in the country at that time of a rural cemetery on this lines. And usually most of them, not all of them, but most of them will literally be called rural cemetery. When you see that name, that is usually born out of a very particular era in American history, and this is a very particular type of cemetery. Part of Rural Cemetery in 1849, the Dartmouth Friends purchased a 2-acre plot in the cemetery that will become their burying ground. Many will be reinterred there who have been buried prior to that in that section of the cemetery, but that is also in the cemetery. And just so you get a feel for some of the famous people who are buried there, Albert Bierstadt, a German-American printer, extremely influential printer, especially when it comes to our national parks. He painted some of those grand landscapes of national parks that attracted people to visit some of our first national parks. Martha B. Briggs was an African-American educator who lived here in the city, very famous. John H. Clifford, a Massachusetts governor and attorney general. William Crapo, who was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Alexander Du Bois, the grandfather of W.E.B. Du Bois, and Howard Sargent, who was a U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. So there are some very famous burials in rural cemeteries you drive through, something that I didn't realize. Some of them, Bierstadt I knew, Briggs I knew, but some of these other ones I did not. Next slide, please. So how do we get a plot in rural cemeteries set aside for Civil War veterans? And Rod already mentioned this, but to rehash, on October 4th, 1866, the first GAR post in Massachusetts is formed in New Bedford. GAR, Grand Army of the Republic. This is that veterans organization for soldiers who fought during the Civil War. The GAR post, named after Colonel William Rodman, also the namesake of Fort out here, Fort Taber's and Fort Rodman. He is an individual, he's the highest ranking individual killed during the Civil War from New Bedford. He's a lieutenant colonel. He's killed on May 27, 1863 at the Battle of Port Hudson. But this organization, this post in the GAR, is going to decide that they want to purchase a plot of land in New Bedford to bury their veterans, to bury the people who are their members, and their families. That's an important note to make too. Next slide, please. So this is the so I found this article that mentions the first burial in the plot at Rural Cemetery. It was reposted in the Fall River Daily and Evening News. Full confession here, the great part about the internet is things like newspaper.com, ancestry.com, Fold3, stuff like that the Sons of Union Veterans do, right? These great databases where you can just go in, type in a few keywords, and bada bing, bada boom, what would have taken historians literally hours of work, if not days, if not weeks, if not months to find. Those little tidbits are now right at the tips of our fingertips. Problem though, not every newspaper has been digitized. Not every newspaper, even the ones that have been digitized, there is something about an actual document that can teach you something. We run into this all the time at work. We deal a lot with Sanborn maps, which were insurance maps from the late 19th, early 20th century. In Sanborn, they would keep very detailed accounts of what was the building made out of, how much taxes were on the building, all that stuff. What they would literally do in the office is paste over. If a building changed, they would literally paste over the original document. Well, when something's a scanned copy, guess what you can't see? You can't see that it was pasted over. So you can lose something, whereas if you look at the actual document, you can literally see the flap of paper being pasted over it, right? So there's always a danger to digitizing things, right? There's certain things that may be in an original document that you can only see by looking at it itself. I say this with knowing how newspapers worked at that time. This probably did not first appear in the Fall River Daily and Evening News. It probably was posted in the local New Bedford paper, probably the Standard or one of the other individual papers that were printed here in New Bedford, and was recopied for the Fall River paper. Sort of like the Associated Press today and how it works. A lot of older newspaper styles, they literally would just take articles that had been written by one newspaper outlet and literally just copy and paste it, right? It was very easy in a time when these things were literally still being printed up. So, that's my full disclosure. If you went through at the New Bedford Public Library, which you can do, sit in front of the old microfilm machine and sit there for hours and hours and hours and hours, you probably can find a very similar article to this, if not word for word verbatim, that was posted in New Bedford first, but those are not digitized. The Fall River Daily and Evening News is digitized. So, I didn't have the time to do that. Full confession, this presentation did not get finished this morning. But you're able to pull up these things. So the members of Post Number 1 GAR attended the funeral of Comrade George S. Howard yesterday afternoon. The body was interred in the Soldiers' Lot in Rural Cemetery, the first burial that has been made in that lot. It's July 22nd, 1870. The GAR Post had purchased that lot earlier that year in 1870. So that's an article of the first person who is buried there. Hit the next slide. So who are some of these individuals? What's their story? And what can we learn from their experiences? So I'm going to pick 3 to go over with you today. My job became much more difficult when I realized that that binder was not going to be helpful, right? So I had to do some legwork. I had to do some research, had to find some individuals who may have an interesting story, and to get into the archival information, the sources that we have to try to learn more about these people. Because none of these people, there was never a book written about Manuel Antone. There probably never will be a book written about Manuel Antone. There probably will never be an article or even a short story written about him. But I would argue that his story is important. The Civil War is a combination of stories of individuals. Oftentimes we just talk about the most important of those individuals who get into the history books. But at the end of the day, numbers on a page of how many casualties, right? Those are all humans. Those are real people who lived and experienced life just like you and me, who had the same fears, the same worries, the same concerns, right? They were real people, and I believe that each of those individual stories matters when we look at the American Civil War. So the first individual I stumbled upon, it's kind of funny when you do stuff like this. At work, we do a lot of cemetery tours, and we joke about this at work. You just walk into the cemetery and see what speaks to you. You know, sometimes something will stand out to you. I don't know what it is. I'm not telling you this is a spiritualist connection with the dead or anything like that. But you'll be amazed sometimes if you just walk into a cemetery, like, whose story wants to be told here? What things will stick out to you? So, I found this individual, Manuel Antone. First thing I noticed when I clicked on his, this gravestone was the name, Manuel Antone. My father's name is Manuel. I'm like, oh, connection immediately. I got to learn more about this guy. We got to see who this guy was. It's a Portuguese name. I don't know of many Portuguese soldiers or sailors in the American Civil War. This sounds exciting. Let's see what we could uncover. Next slide, please. So he started the research a little bit and started to piece together his story. There were a lot of Manuel Antones that lived in the New Bedford area in the 19th century. I know that's surprising. I know, Joe. I know, that's horribly surprising. People with a name like Manny. There never would be a lot of those around here. So you have to try to find the clues that would indicate to you, who are these people, right? Who is this person? Can we try to differentiate this person from the other Manuel Antones at the time? So you stumble across things like what is listed up here on the screen, this census record from the 1900s. So here's a Manuel Antone. He's born in 1836, right around the right time for our guy. The wife's name is listed as Emma. We know, thanks to the gravestones that's right next to him, his wife's name was not Emma. His wife's name was Amy. His daughter's name was Emma, though. So that's not immediately something that's a red flag necessarily. Something that's posing a question in my mind, right? But census takers today, as well as historically, are well known for getting things wrong and misidentifying people in the record. So this might not be him, but a Manuel and an Emma Antone, they're both listed in the same residence. It could be him. The great part about later census records that you don't get in the earlier 19th century census records is all of the details that are down the end, including if this person is not born here in the United States, when did they immigrate to the United States? 1854, the census record states that Manuel Antone came here to the United States. Next slide. So maybe this individual comes over in 1854. Well, we go to the next year's census, 1910. Manuel Antone again. This time, the wife's name, Amy, appears here. Wife. They're around the same age. You'll notice discrepancies, though, in the age listed here. Supposedly, when they get married, the marriage record says they're the same age. This says that they're 5 years apart, right? Census keepers, not always the best at what they're doing, and people forget too. Things happen over time. On this census record, it says that he arrives in 1844. 1844, 1854, don't know for sure, but probably somewhere in the 1840s or 1850s, Manuel Antone is going to immigrate over here to the United States. Something I didn't get a huge opportunity to do, but the Whaling Museum and other great institutions in the area, like the Nantucket Whaling Museum, the New Bedford Whaling Museum, they have these great resources with ship logs. You can literally go through, and same thing, you can search names on ship logs and try to identify people that you may be looking for who sailed on a certain vessel at a certain time. Manuel Antone is, again and again in his records, he's pretty consistent with this. He indicates that he is born in St. Nicholas, Sal Nicolai, in Cape Verde. So Cape Verde, off the coast of Africa, Portuguese, but that is where he is indicating that he is coming from, is Cape Verde. St. Nicholas, St. Nicholas, St. Nicholas. You see it again and again, Cape Verde. So this is his port of origin. Most likely, knowing what we know about stories of other Azorian and Cape Verdean individuals around that time in the first half of the 19th century, he comes here to New Bedford because of whaling, right? Many whaling ships would start off their voyage with smaller crews than they needed. Once they got out to sea, sail across the Atlantic. They would time that perfectly with when right whales were spawning off of the coast of the Azores and Cape Verde in the late summer, early fall, and they would stop off in those ports and they would pick people up who were experienced fishermen, these Azorian and Cape Verdean whalers and fishermen. So chances are Manuel Antone finds himself over here without his family or anybody from back at home, because that's his story. So he's going to come back here to New Bedford, and he will make the decision, like many, to stay in New Bedford. What's the exact year? I'm not able to determine that at this point, but probably at some point in the late 1840s, early 1850s. Next slide. We have his marriage license and his marriage record. Up in the top right corner there, kind of tough to read. That is the marriage log book from the New Bedford City Hall, the copy of it listing it out. This is a much later, obviously, if you go to City Hall today, right, and you want a birth certificate, you want a marriage certificate, right? This is very similar to what you would get today if you went to City Hall and requested such information. So he is married to Amy Watt on June 4th, 1857, here in New Bedford. They're both listed as 24 years old. I want you to keep that age in mind, because something is going to cause Manuel a lot of trouble later in his life is his birth date. His birth date. When was he born? We'll get there in a little bit. But he marries Amy in 1857. Next slide. By 1862, they're going to have their first daughter, Emma, their only child, Emma. So Emma will be born in 1862. And around that time, in September of 1862, Manuel Antone is going to decide that he is going to enlist in the U.S. Navy. Right? Shouldn't surprise us in the sense that this is an experienced mariner, right? This is an experienced seaman. He's already been doing the work on a ship. If he was going to decide to join a branch of the military, the Navy makes a lot of sense, right? He's an experienced person. There's another problem, too, which probably also may lead him to serving in the U.S. Navy. Manuel Antone is from Cape Verde. Cape Verde tends to be a mixture of people with African and Portuguese ancestry. Again and again, in the records, you will see him listed as either black or mulatto. Black or mulatto. In 1862, is the U.S. Army integrated? No. Is the U.S. Navy integrated?
Yes.
Yes, right? So he, in 1862, bear in mind, this is before the Emancipation Proclamation. Sure, we have people of African descent serving in units down in New Orleans and in southern Louisiana. We start to see the early units of African Americans serving in a way. We're still months off, though, from the 54th, the 55th Massachusetts, the United States Colored Troops in late 1862. So where could he literally serve, being of the skin color that he is? He can serve in the Navy at that point. So he has this experience as a mariner. Also, I think the color of his skin has a good deal to do with why he decides to enlist. But he's going to enlist in New York Yes, Joe.
Was there a discrepancy in pay like there was in the Army?
That's a great question. I do not know if there was a
I do
discrepancy.
not believe that there was, because you got paid at the rate at which you were, but if you were a color, you were limited in what rates you could be in the Navy.
Okay. All right.
So, but to the point, during the Civil War, 25% of the US Navy sailors were black.
Right.
So, it was a lot of them joined the Navy at the time.
Thank you. We can hit the next slide. But it's very clearly the same person, the age, the date matches up, all of that. This is an affidavit that has to do with his attempts to get a pension. But the reason why I put this here is because it gives us a great detailed account of who this individual was. Part of these affidavits was writing, who was this person, how tall were they, what color hair did they have. It gives us a feel for who this individual was, right? We don't have a picture of Manuel Antone, but we can kind of start to get at it from the information that he provides here in this affidavit. So, that I was born on the island of St. Nicholas, Cape Verde Islands, and was about 28 years old at enlistment. By occupation, a mariner, 5 foot 3 inches in height, complexion dark mulatto, black hair, black eyes, marks an India ink ring. He had tattoos. That's what that's referencing. And these are all the tattoos that he had. On mid finger of left hand, full rigged brig under sail on left hand, star and circle moon, lettering in square and a brigantine on left arm. So he has stars, moons, he's got ships on his hand and his arm, basically in tattoos. He's got an anchor on his right hand and a grapevine about an inch long on his right wrist. Stars and circles formed on the right leg above the knee. It goes on, he had other tattoos, but this guy's kind of the quintessential sailor, isn't he, right? Even today, right? Sailors, fishermen are known for their tattoos. He's no different, right? He has a lot of ink on his body. Next slide. He is going to, at first, serve on the USS North Carolina. The USS North Carolina is an older ship. It's been around for a long time by the time of the Civil War. In fact, before the Civil War, it gets put on what may be considered easy duty, if you will, in New York Harbor. Basically, the ship is just in New York Harbor. It's escorting vessels in and out of the harbor. It is an older ship. It's very much a ship-of-line kind of style. This is not the newer ships. This is not the newest, greatest technology. That's why it is placed where it's placed. So he's going to serve there for a few months. That probably was pretty boring, pretty inconsequential work for Manuel. But then he's going to get reassigned to the USS Colorado, which will actually put him into some action. We can hit the next slide here. So again, a lot of times, right, if someone lives long enough, they have to go through the pension process. The pension process can sometimes be some of the best information that we can get about these individuals who served in the war, who may not leave behind a diary or some other form of account that we have, right? Because in the pension process, oftentimes, they themselves are writing about their own experiences, or they're speaking about their own experiences to a lawyer or someone else who's filling out the paperwork for them. So if they live long enough and they give us that privilege to have applied for a pension at some point, we get a lot of great information out of that. Now, one of the problems for Manuel is that his name is not always recorded correctly in the record. Sometimes he's known as Manuel Joseph. Most likely Joseph is his middle name, and they leave off the Antone on the end. So sometimes on the ship's log, literally from month to month, his name will change from Manuel Antone to Manuel Joseph, right? It's a clerical error from the people who are keeping those records. What we see here, though, people questioned his service, is what we're seeing on the left-hand side here. And this is a letter being put forth indicating that there is no question. In answer to yours of August 17th, 1894, in the case of Manuel Joseph, alias Antone, you are informed that Manuel Antone, seaman, enlisted on the North Carolina September 4th, 1862, served to November 25th of 1862, and then was discharged from the Colorado in February of 1864. So he's going to serve on the North Carolina until 1862. Then he is going to serve on the Colorado. Now, all of this lines up perfectly because the Colorado in mid-1862 has returned back to northern ports to be repaired. So the Colorado has gone from the blockading squadron down south in the Gulf. They've suffered some damage. They're going to sail all the way back up north to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's in Portsmouth, New Hampshire that he is going to get reassigned from the North Carolina to the Colorado. The Colorado in early 1863 is going to leave Portsmouth and make its way back down to the blockading squadron in the Gulf. Next slide, please. So, what did his service look like? We already mentioned the top 2 points. The Colorado sails from Portsmouth, New Hampshire on December 9th, 1862. On May 13th, 1863, he arrives off the coast of Mobile, Alabama, rejoining the blockade. On May 17th, they help in the capture of the Hunter, a blockade runner. And then ultimately will spend the next better part of 1863 in the blockading squadron. That's pretty repetitive work, very much like a soldier in the siege lines, right? Very repetitive but important work, right? The blockade is cutting off that trade between southern ports and the outside world. So it's important work that he is doing, but probably tedious and boring for him by and large. But especially for someone who had lived the life of a sailor as a whaler, right? Whalers can have its ups and downs, but I imagine that Navy life would have had its ups and downs too, right? The peaks of chasing a vessel like the Hunter, and then some of that downtime too as well. Ultimately, though, he enlists for 1 year service. So by the time he arrives back in Portsmouth, the Colorado returns for repairs, and then that is when he will be discharged a little bit over a year that he had signed up for. Next slide. After the war, Manuel goes back to whaling. So there's this great story during the whaling fleet, 1870s, 1880s. There are a few notable instances where the whaling fleet up in Alaska, there's whaling up in Alaska, and they actually literally get trapped in the ice up in Alaska. This happens actually to one of the vessels that Manuel Antone is on. The New Bedford vessel bark, Andrew Hicks, is one of those vessels that gets trapped in the ice. Manuel will return home. What is all this doing though, right? Whaling's very hard on the body. We're living and working in the U.S. Navy, I'm sure, was hard on his body over the course of his years. Now, he's getting up there in age by the 1880s, right? All of this is certainly wearing on his body over time. Next slide. Let the next slide, please. And so, in earnest, around 1894, he's going to start to apply for pensions from the U.S. government and from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is going to begin a series of battles that's going to last about 2 decades to try to get a pension from the U.S. Navy and from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Part of the problem by 1894, he's not all that old, right? In the grand scheme of things, he's in his 50s. He's not that old, but all of these years of labor on a ship have worn on his body. He's incapable of doing that work anymore. But he still has a family to support. He still needs to survive somehow. And so he is going to start this process of again and again filling out these forms for an invalid pension. And again, we see these getting stamped rejected, rejected, rejected. We'll hit the next slide. Part of the problem for Manuel Antone, it seems, is it's very difficult to prove what things he's suffering from is directly related to his service versus what things are from his time as a whaler, right? Some of the things that he's complaining about is rheumatism in his left arm and his left shoulder area, chronic pain in his back and his neck area, right? These things are difficult to directly link to a year of military service. As time goes on, though, and some of these the ability for people to apply for pension is going to be expanded to more and more people, there is going to be an age limit that's going to be very important. Individuals over a certain age can apply for certain types of pensions. Others under a certain age can't. This is where his birth date is going to get him into some trouble. So we see here one of these applications. He's listing out all the details we've already talked about, where he was born. When were you born? Unknown day and month in 1833. St. Nicholas, Cape Verde, right? So he's not born here, so for him to be able to go to the local baptismal record at a church or to go to the local city or town hall to get that, he can't get that information. Can't really prove it. So he's trying to use, as we go on, other things that may indicate his age that are legal records. Ultimately, we'll go to the next slide. What does it, what ends up getting him approved for a pension is the fact that at the time of his marriage, that marriage certificate I showed earlier, he's listed as 24 years old, which would make him 72 years old when he's applying for this pension. Finally, in the early 1900s, in 1909, when he makes his final attempt at a pension in 1909, he's 72, and so at that point, now he is approved because he provides that marriage certificate that I showed as proof of his age. It's the only thing that he could use to prove his age. But finally, after 20 years of fighting, he will get his pension. And this is the reasons why they list out rheumatism, total deafness of his left ear, partial deafness of his right ear. That most likely was from military service, from being on a warship and being very close to cannons. Rheumatism of right shoulder, right leg, and totally disabled for manual labor. Next slide. And this finally, very faded, again, problem with digitized copies, right? I don't know if this is a problem with the original or just the person who took the scan of it. This is him being officially receiving indication that he's been awarded his pension. We'll go to the next slide. We'll skip that. That's just some more of his general affidavits. There's a whole bunch of this stuff. You literally can click through slide after slide after slide after slide after slide and follow the story along. It's a pretty cool story to do in that way. This, speaking of applications for headstones, is the application that his granddaughter, Miss Daisy Cole, that is the daughter of Emma, who was his daughter, applies for to get the headstone placed at Rural Cemetery. So pretty cool. Next slide. And then here's an image of both Manuel and Amy's headstones today. Manuel is on the left, Amy is on the right. Those are close-ups on the left and the right. And that's the little guy, my son Luke, helping me to clean stuff off from the front of Amy's grave. Next slide. So another individual buried there is William Soule. William Soule is another interesting story. We'll go to the next slide. But as you can see, right, you look at that gravestone, right, in much need of work. You can barely, when you're there in person, you can read it. But in this photo, you can barely make out Soule. So Soule's records, we have his enlistment papers, and we also have his record of marriage. Don't have a lot that appears from early in life, but up on the top there, we see him getting married. He's 26 years old when he gets married. He gets married just prior to the American Civil War, the outbreak of the war in 1860. His wife Margaret is listed there too. This is his enlistment papers. City of New Bedford, you can see how they actually literally were making edits to some of these documents that were form documents, right? Town of, they crossed out town and put City of New Bedford. And he is going to enlist 27 years old, and he is going to enlist to serve in one of the Massachusetts regiments. Next slide. So he is going to be in the 3rd Cavalry of Massachusetts, in the 3rd Cavalry. He's 29, I said 27, 29 years old. He's 5 feet, 7.5 inches tall, light complexion, hazel eyes, and dark hair. And he's born in Westport. He's worked as a laborer. He is from New Bedford, though, and that is where he is going to enlist on August 20th, 1862. Next slide. So these cards basically follow his years of service. Not a horribly remarkable military career by any sense, but I think very indicative of the life that was lived by many soldiers during the war. right? You may not see a whole bunch of action during the war, but the effects of wartime service will wear on a person over the course of their life. The third mass ends up down in the southern campaigns, down in the Louisiana area. He ends up, he is listed from October of 1862 up until March of 1863 as being present for duty. So he's participating with the unit. They're participating in some forays, some minor skirmishes, some minor military action. Nothing over the top, but we start to see a change in March of 1863. Absent, he's sick. And this is going to plague him for the next several months, and ultimately will lead to his discharge in July and August of 1863 from dysentery. So he's suffering with dysentery literally for months, and that will lead to his honorable discharge. If we hit the next slide. These are his discharge papers, thanks to his disability, so certificate of disability for discharge. All of his details listed out. Chronic dysentery is the cause of his being discharged from service. Something that does not seem like a big deal to us today, but certainly historically, in the time and the place, was a major issue for him. If we hit the next slide. After serving for about a year in service, again, just another part of all of the discharge paperwork that have to go in. Next slide. When he returns to New Bedford, we see him working. This is actually pretty interesting. And the story that was mentioned earlier by Rod about this individual who serves in war, survives it, and then comes home and has this near-death experience. Very close to the story of William P. Soule. William P. Soule's occupation is a driver of an engine for a fire engine. So he's basically a firefighter in the 1880s. He is the person who is driving these horse-pulled fire engines that they would use at that time. Next slide. Soule, unfortunately, in an accident during a fire alarm, is going to, and these series, this is the article in the newspaper, and the little excerpts from the article. An incendiary fire was discovered in the attic of a house on Middle Street Thursday night and was extinguished with slight damage as steamer Progress left her house in response to the alarm. The horses behaved badly, and the driver, William P. Soule, thinking that the reins might not be properly fastened, stopped the team. A mistaken effort at the economy. The street lights were not burning, and Mr. Soule could not see the reins. So the street lights weren't on, so he couldn't see the reins. He called upon George F. Solon to look at them. The horses were prancing, and Mr. Swain could not steady himself. He remarked that he thought they were all right and stopped nearer the horses to examine them closer when a gun was fired at the corner of Elm Street, and the horses dashed away. After turning down Elm Street, the team became completely unmanageable, and they tore down the hill at a terrific pace. They turned south at the corner of Cushman Avenue. The engine slewed and overturned on the east sidewalk, and Mr. Soule was thrown from his seat. As a result, he is going to suffer what most likely was internal wounds from this horrific accident that happens, and as a result, he is going to pass away. The official cause of death in the death log down bottom is fracture of pelvis. So an individual who may not have had a remarkable career as a soldier during the Civil War, but I would argue, beyond that, giving his life in service of his community still. Next slide. And the last, and this is William Soule and his wife, Margaret. They're buried side by side again. This is a general theme when we clean these graves. We will not just be cleaning the veterans' graves themselves. Many of their wives, and in some cases their children, are also buried in that section with them. Next slide. And the last person I want to talk about, because we're getting near the end here, John R. Kincaid. We'll go to the next slide. John R. Kincaid is born on June 24th, 1842. He's the son of Robert and Ann Kincaid. They are Irish immigrants. The Kincaids are going to pick up and move their entire family over here to the New World. This is right around that time, right, of mass Irish immigration here to the United States of America in the 1840s and 1850s. They're going to settle in Plymouth. That is where John is living at the outbreak of the war. John by trade is a tinsmith, so that's the work that he is doing. He is not going to enlist until later in the war. Although he could have enlisted in 1862 potentially, he is not going to enlist until March of 1864 at the age of 21. And he is enlisting. He is not being drafted. That is around the time where you have to wonder if this individual is drafted or not. He actually does volunteer his services to serve in the 58th Massachusetts, and he's not serving as a stand-in for someone else, which was also common practice at the time. Next slide. In the 1850 census, just to give you an indication here, the Kincaids are living in Plymouth. So this is them listed out in Plymouth. Mom and Dad, Robert and Ann. There's John. He is the oldest of the 3 surviving children. He's 13 years old at that point in 1850. And Dad is working as a laborer, right? So this is a very indicative story of many Irish immigrants at that time. Next slide. 58th Massachusetts is going to leave for Washington, D.C. in late April of 1864. They get assigned to the 9th Army Corps, commanded by Ambrose Burnside's local. And they will fight at pretty much every single major clash during the Overland Campaign, right? The Overland Campaign, known for its bloody and repetitive and just again and again horrific casualty rates and toll of battle again and again and again and again as Grant pushes further, closer and closer to Richmond. So they're very involved at the Battle of Wilderness. They are lightly engaged at Spotsylvania, lightly engaged at North Anna. Lightly engaged means they have suffered 10 casualties. Okay, so lightly is in the eyes of the beholder, I suppose, right? Some would say that that's not lightly engaged if you lose 10 people in the course of a battle. In Cold Harbor, they are very heavily engaged. Next slide. They will participate in the Battle of the Crater. The 58th Massachusetts is one of those units that will charge towards that exploded gap in the Confederate siege works. They'll also participate at the Battle of Walden Railroad. What is important for our man, though, John R. Kincaid, is his service at the Battle of Poplar's Grove Church, pictured there on the right side of the slide, also known as Peebles Farm. Next slide. So during this conflict, this is part of that attempt by Grant to continue to push the siege lines further and further away and to try to capture all of those railroads that are running into Petersburg from different directions to try to supply Richmond. So he's trying to cut off all those rail lines. He's trying to extend those siege lines to engulf Lee in his trenches at Petersburg and Richmond. During the fighting, the 58th is going to suffer heavily. In one account, courtesy of the reports of the history of the 58th Massachusetts, when they call roll the next day, only 45 soldiers are present for duty the next day after this engagement. Most of them get captured. John R. Kincaid is an example of that. John gets shot in the left arm during this battle, and he's going to be captured by Confederate forces. Next slide. He's going to be confined at Richmond on October 5th, 1864 through October 9th, 1864. So only for 4 days is he going to be confined in a Confederate prisoner of war camp. His condition, because of his wound, is that severe and that serious. It seems as though, although I cannot prove this beyond a doubt, a Confederate surgeon was probably the one to have performed an amputation of his left arm below the elbow. His left arm is going to be amputated. His condition, though, is so bad that he's going to be paroled. He'll spend some time at the hospital at City Point. And then by November, he is sent on furlough back home to Plymouth. And his condition is not going to get any better. A doctor in Plymouth is basically going to say he cannot go back to Army service. He's going to be sent up to the Army hospital up in Reedville, Massachusetts. And that is where an Army surgeon officially will discharge him from his duties on February 24th, 1865. Next slide. Pretty clear that although John goes on to live for 10 more years effectively after the war, his life is never going to his health is never going to quite recover from that injury that he would suffer during the war, that wound that he would suffer. Here, the family ends up moving to New Bedford after John's father died. John is living in a house at that point, 28 years old, never marries. He's living with his mother Nancy and a younger sister Anna. He is a grocer here in the city at 5 Elm Street in 1872. We see that in a local directory at that time, but he's never going to quite recover from those wounds that he would suffer. And in 1875, ultimately, at the age of 32, he's going to pass away as a result of complications from infection from the wound that he had suffered from 11 years earlier. Next slide. And that is John's gravestone today. It was on the first slide that I showed. It has been toppled over. So not only is the work of cleaning gravestones, but also certainly in some cases the repair of some. Next slide. So we get back to the point of what does it matter, right? Why do we do this? So we've heard 3 different stories, and each one is unique, right? And if you did this for 100 soldiers buried there, you did this for 1,000 soldiers buried all across the country, you may have some common lines in some of those stories, but all of those stories would be unique, right? Because each one was their own individual, with their own experiences, with their own lives lived, with their own story to tell. One of the best parts about stone markers in a cemetery is the fact that you can connect with those people who are not in the history books. Someone's name who may never appear in a historic report of a battle or in a book about a battle, but you can walk through a cemetery and you can see that name and realize that that individual was a person who has their own story, and you can find that story. You can't find that story for this and future generations by looking at a headstone that looks like this. But a clean headstone can tell a big story of a person who lived and fought 160 years ago in the American Civil War. I've talked for far too long. Any questions or comments? Yes?
Larry has the microphone.
Oh, they're talking to the microphone.
So please talk into the microphone.
Questions or thoughts? Yes?
I can project, I don't need that.
But we need it to record, so
Okay.
you don't have a choice.
I'd like to do some gravestone cleaning and be part of this whole endeavor. And all I know is the biological cleaner is what you have told us about. So this is going to be very fascinating.
Definitely, yeah. So the first stage, hopefully what we can do on that first Saturday is going to be to go around and to make record of all these individuals, what we can read, what the condition of it is, take pictures of it, right? Both for liability's sake and also before and afters are always pretty amazing when we do this.
Is it legal, I guess you might say, to try to scrape some of the debris off so you could read it?
So I won't speak to the legality of it. Usually you want permission from the families or from the cemeteries themselves before you do any type of work in cemeteries like this. There is a very particular way and guidelines that the Department of the Interior presents as the appropriate way to clean gravestones. And it's usually the D2 biological solution is the one that's approved by the department. It's what they use to clean all the monuments in DC and all that stuff. So there is a process that the leading experts in the government suggest for doing this type of work. Could you go up to a gravestone and scrape it? You go on the very close borderlines of causing damage and other things to it, right, where you may actually be causing more of a problem than good and may legally be responsible for. So when we do this, right, we're going to do it in a way that's appropriate and correct and that is suggested by all of leading specialists in the field of how to correctly do this type of work. Yes?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just point out that D2 doesn't work immediately, right? You spray it on, and it'll take all this stuff off, but it'll take a couple months before all that stuff comes off and starts to look really good. Initially, it'll look it'll turn everything kind of like an orangish color or off color, and then after a while, it'll all fall off and start to look white.
Does rain help it?
Yeah. Once it soaks in, you put it on dry.
I just have a follow-up to what you said. Do you ever search out any relatives of the people that the graves you're going to actually work on?
You certainly could.
I mean, I know you don't know legally, but do you need to do that? Make an effort to do it?
So the way that this has been described to me by people who, and Judge Michaud, who's our leading legal expert in the room, can correct me if I'm wrong. The city of New Bedford, the Cemetery Commission, has indicated that they are not opposed to us doing this work. Which at that point, because this is not a family plot and it's not owned by a particular family, those graves of the individuals who are buried in their family plot may be more complicated than this, because that is I don't know what the proper term is, but because that plot is controlled by the city, that legally, by getting their permission, we have what we need to do it. Is that may have not been the best legal explanation, but. Yes, Rich.
I actually have two entirely separate questions. Was it very common that soldiers dying to the south, buried in the vicinity at the battlefield, were disinterred and brought back to northern cemeteries to be with their families?
It does happen, yeah. When you look at national cemeteries in the South, right, I think that speaks to the number of individuals who did not experience that. Because there is a certain amount of money and the ability for family members to be able to go to those sites and to find those individuals and hunt them down, or to pay someone to do that type of work, and then have to pay to have the body brought back home to be reinterred here. So I would not say that that is overly common, but does it happen? Absolutely. And that's how all of those individuals that are here now, if they died in combat, got here. It also is heavily reliant upon the ability to be able to identify those individuals, right? Did someone in the battle, after the battle's over, did the person who buries that person, did they know them? Did they take the time to scratch out in pencil or something on a makeshift headboard the person's name? Or did this person's body just get dumped into a massive trench and not be able to be identified at all, right? So there's a lot of factors that play into that. I think the story about the individual that I talked about who died at the Army hospital in Philadelphia as a result of his wounds, right? That's an interesting story because he was identifiable, right? He died in an Army hospital, he's not being buried in a mass trench, right? The nurses and the staff, they're able to write home to his family, and his family's able to pay to have the body brought back. But it's heavily reliant upon A, being able to identify the body, and B, a family being able to afford to bring the body home.
Okay, thanks. The second question, you filled up the screen throughout your presentation with a large number of documents. And I'm wondering, are those online, and what collections and what institutions did you find most helpful in this research?
Great question. So, frankly, the easiest way to find a lot of almost all of what I found today is online databases like Ancestry.com and Fold3. It's a one-stop shop, right, for a lot of that information. I'll get on my soapbox here. I do not think that those documents that are held at the National Archives and other records administration offices should be behind a paywall that a private company controls and monitors. That's my soapbox argument. I don't think that that should be the case, and that those should be accessible to every American should they want to find them. One of the easiest way to find those documents without going down to the National Archives, though, if they've been digitized like these have been, is through those kind of databases like Fold3 and Ancestry.com. But they sit behind a paywall, which you have to pay Ancestry.com their money to get to those, which I'll argue we shouldn't have to do.
When we clean the headstones, do we do the base of the headstones too?
I believe the idea is the entire headstone should get cleaned, sprayed down and cleaned.
Just the headstone,
The headstone, yes.
like those?
I would say the bases too. Anything that is part of it should be sprayed down. Certainly trying to get lettering visible, I think, is an important part of it, but you want the whole thing to look nice. And there are some, I should point out, when we're there in the cemetery, I noticed there are clearly some family members or other people who have already done that to their ancestors' graves that are there. Some of those were recently cleaned, and you could tell the ones that were recently cleaned, they were looking good.
See, I wanna do my family stones.
Great, well, thank you all.